Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Friday professional development, which is very exciting, and we're very happy to have it. Test tactics for high school equivalency success. I know that we had many people sign up for this, and some of us are not working, and some of us are at home, some of us are back at school. So we are going to be recording today's professional development so that we have it and we can share it out with all of you, and that we can share it out with those that weren't able to make it today. We're so excited to have this in partnership by New Readers Press, and we'll talk about New Readers Press in just a little bit with our wonderful consultant, Elaine Pardick, who is just a great advocate here in our state, a great partner, and she'll have her contact information to share with everybody as well. And then Stephen Schmidt and Greg Stultz will be our presenters for this afternoon. So if you want to go ahead and say hello in the chat, let us know your name and your program. I am going to go ahead as well and put in the link for if you are looking for sketches. So we've changed our format a little bit. Before, we would ask you to put your name and the pick number into the chat, but instead we're getting more organized every time. So I'm going to show you quickly. This is what the form looks like. Actually, let me show you what it looks like on your end. So you click on that link, and what the form will ask you for is your email, your name, your personal identification code for sketches, which is called your PIC. If you don't know that, I would encourage you to look that up. You can also email it to me later, but really trying to push everybody to use this Google form. And this form obviously would be for those of you that are looking for continuing education hours for your teacher certification or administrator licenses. And then the last box is which professional development are you attending? It's a drop down. So you'd click on the drop down arrow there, and you would select this one, teaching tactics for high school equivalency success, and then click submit, and we'll get you registered and all taken care of. So I will repost that link again in the chat as we keep talking, but that's going to be our hopefully easier and better form to be able to do that. A couple of other housekeeping things. We're recording today's session. All the materials we've made available to you, as well as the recording. Anytime you got a question, put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that and make sure that we address those. And we would encourage you, if you're not already engaged with our committees, to join us. And we have a high school equivalency committee, and we have our wonderful chair, Whitney Detmer, that we'll talk about that in just a second. But I wanted to remind you that we do have a couple of upcoming professional development opportunities on February 25th and on March 17th and 18th. Sorry, my computer is dying there. On February 25th, it's about the IEP process, as well as the rights of families and individuals aged 18 to 26 in adult education and special education services. We've got a presentation from the Michigan Alliance for Families. And then on March 17th and 18th is our virtual Spring Institute. So we hope you'll register. We've got a lot of great sessions. And hopefully next week, if everything goes right, we will have the conference agenda out for everybody to see. And so I'm going to turn over to Whitney, who's gonna, if she wants to share a little bit about the High School Equivalency Committee, and then she'll be introducing Elaine Pardick from New Readers Press.
Thanks, Patrick. So High School Equivalency Committee also actually talks a lot about diplomas as well. So if you do either of those in your program, you are welcome to join us. A lot of what happens in our committee is just discussion and questions. People bring questions from their own classrooms. So it's great friendships, great conversations. We try to solve problems. We put out PDs for McKay. And it's also 2 sketches. So if you need sketches, it's one Friday a month from 1 to 3. There are some other committees available if high school equivalency or diploma isn't your thing, but I think that our committee definitely is one that gets a lot done, can answer your questions, and you can just learn a lot from people around the state. So the 11th, next Friday, join us in the afternoon. I will now turn it over to Elaine from New Readers Press.
Thanks, Whitney and Patrick. Sure appreciate it. Good to see you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, especially during this terrible, terrible winter snowstorm we're all experiencing. I hope everyone is safe and staying warm. Presenting this morning is Steve Schmidt and Greg Stultz. Also joining us this morning is Dan Helms. Dan is the National Sales Director for New Readers Press. Steve is an adult education consultant and moderator of the Links Reading and Writing Community Group. Steve has worked in adult basic education for over 29 years as an instructor, program director, and professional developer and author. Steve has authored several resources for New Readers Press, including the Writing for the GED Textbook 4. Greg has served as an educational consultant, sales consultant for product trainer for product trainer for New Readers Press, the publishing division of Pro Literacy, for many years. Greg spent 8 years in Japan as a teacher, trainer, and ELL instructor. I would like to now welcome Steve and Greg this morning, and thank you for joining us, and I will turn things over to Steve. Thank you.
Well, Lane, thank you so much. Really appreciate that wonderful, warm welcome, and glad to see, albeit virtually, everyone here today. And welcome and greetings. And I'm so glad that you're here. Appreciate your time this morning and investing your time in some professional development. As Elaine mentioned, I'll be presenting along with Greg. Greg will be batting cleanup, so to speak, and he'll be finishing out. I'll be doing the first part and he'll be doing the last part. And it's always a thrill for me to work with someone I respect so much as I do Greg. One of my mentors in adult ed always told me, spend time with people that work for various publishing companies because they are so knowledgeable, they know so much. And that's advice that I have taken over the years and have really learned quite a bit from Greg. And so spend some time with Greg, spend some time with Elaine. They're not just out to sell things, they are out to provide knowledge, and they certainly do a wonderful job of that. And so thrilled to be working with them today. And by the way, I love New Readers Press. You might ask me why. Why do you love New Readers Press? Unlike so many publishers in adult ed, New Readers Press, all proceeds that are made from sales of New Readers Press products goes to fund Pro Literacy. And Pro Literacy is a nonprofit organization that supports literacy causes not only in the United States, but around the world. So that's a good thing to think about, is not only are any purchases going to support great materials, but they also will help eventually support Pro Literacy and all the amazing work that Pro Literacy does across the United States and across the world. So thank you, New Readers Press. Thank you, Pro Literacy, for all that you do. And speaking of thank yous, thank you, Michigan adult educators, wherever you are. I saw several folks, Romulus, Houghton Lake, wherever you may be. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's making a difference every day, day in and day out, whether we see it or not. We're planting seeds, we're changing outcomes. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And speaking of Michigan, little known fact is I am a Michigan native. I grew up in Oakland County, Bloomfield Township, 15-mile road and Telegraph, if you know that area. And actually, I grew up 1 mile away from the Macus Red Fox restaurant, where on July 30th, 1975, labor leader Jimmy Hoffa was last seen alive. So I know well that payphone next to the Damon Hardware, where he made his last phone call. And Dad would send me up to the hardware store all the time to get stuff. So, but anyways, let the record show I had nothing to do with Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. I was only 9 years old at the time, and I had nothing to do with it. So let that record show. But it's an interesting story. We're always fascinated by mysteries. So if you would please grab the handout I put a couple times in the chat box. Our handout that we'll be using today, and I will be referring to it frequently. You can grab just click on that bit.ly link that will take you to a Google Drive folder where you can access my handout. And I'll be referring to it throughout the presentation. So you'll definitely want to grab a hold of that. If you're running into any issues, you can let that know in the chat, and maybe Greg or someone could give you a helping hand there. So what we're going to do today A couple things. I'm going to talk briefly about Webb's depth of knowledge and why that's important and how that shapes and informs high school equivalency tests. And then we'll look at 2 teaching techniques that we can help students be successful in dealing with various Webb's depth of knowledge questions. That would be the think aloud, and that would also be effective questioning. We ask our students questions a lot of times, but we don't always do, I think, the very best job that we could in doing that. And I'm going to give some techniques that will make us better at asking and getting answers to questions. So let's start. And if you're with me, handout there, page 2. You want to grab that. And let's talk a little bit about Webb's depth of knowledge. It runs in the background of the high school equivalency test, whether you're working with the GED test or whether you're working with the high set. These questions inform, or these types of questions, Webb's informs these types of questions. Well, what do you mean? I like to look at Webb's depth of knowledge as like a finish line for learning. In other words, it describes the type of thinking that students need to do in order to run the race that gets them to the finish line. And really what Webb's does is describe how deeply students need to think in order to do a learning task. One misconception with Webb's is that it talks about how hard or how easy questions are, and that's not true. What Webb's does instead is it talks about the cognitive complexity. There's your $50 word for the day. How cognitively complex a question is. So there's somebody you can impress this weekend when they can talk about cognitive complexity and they'll think you're a genius. So the key thing to remember is Webb's talks about the type of thinking required, not how difficult or how easy a question is. And bottom line, how students are asked to express and share their knowledge in thinking. So who cares? Why is DOK? And by that, I mean depth of knowledge. Why is that important? Well, most of the questions on the GED and most of the questions on the high set are at Webb's depth of knowledge level 2 or level 3. You can see this chart on the bottom of page 2 in the handout and also shown on the screen. You can see that roughly 80 to 85% of questions on both the GED and the high set are at Webb's depth of knowledge level 2 or 3. But even more important than that, our big push with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, is to move students from our programs into living wage jobs. And so we know that today's economy is much more of an information economy than what it used to be. And so employees may be hired because of their resume, but a lot of times they are kept employed because of their ability to think and think correctly and make wise decisions on the job. So certainly that type of thinking is vital in today's economy. So to use another analogy here, we can really think about the more deeply we go in Webb's depth of knowledge, the more cognitively challenging the questions will go. Level 1 questions more toward the surface, they're recall questions. Level 2 are more application questions, we're getting a little deeper. Level 3 are more analysis questions, we're getting deeper still. And there is a Webb's depth of knowledge level 4, but the high school equivalency tests do not go that deep, despite one of their claims to the contrary, which I don't agree with, but we won't get in there. So I like to use analogies, and analogies really help students understand. If we can relate new knowledge to that which a student already knows and understands, they have something to tack that new knowledge onto. Makes it a whole lot easier for new knowledge to be understood and assimilated inside the brain. So let's use some analogies here as we talk about Webb's. Webb's depth of knowledge level 1 is like Jeopardy, that long-running TV show. And I know Alex isn't the host anymore, but he's the host still in my heart from watching Jeopardy over the course of years. Well, with DOK level 1, depth of knowledge level 1, our key word here is recall. You know, on Jeopardy, they give you an answer and ask you to have a question which is based on recalling some knowledge, and how that might look on the GED or the high set as recalling a fact or using a formula for a one-step calculation or to describe something. So I think Alex does have a question here for us. So the category is this. Bing! #1 at the box office. This 1995 smash was inspired by the Pixar short film Tin Toy. Tin Toy. I did that. I did that. Tin Toy. So this 1995 smash was inspired by the Pixar short film Tin Toy. So please put in the chat if you think you know what this 1995 smash was. So let's see here. The chat is blowing up here. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Dan. Let's see, anyone else want to put their thought in here? All right, let's see, Elaine, thank you. Dana, thank you. Greg, no thank you. Okay, well, as so many had very correctly said inside the chat, and Whitney, good job. The answer is, or the question should be, what is Toy Story? So DOK level 1s like Jeopardy. And here's an example that we might see on the GED or the high set, where essentially it's giving us a question and asking us to be able to use basically a one-step formula here for, in this case, for figuring out the volume of the cone. So there's nothing wrong with these questions. I think recall questions are important because so many of our students, if they're dealing with unfamiliar subject matter, need a base. They need a base of knowledge, a base to tack further information onto. And so DOK level 1 questions help to form that base. So nothing wrong with using DOK level 1. Going on to DOK level 2. DOK level 2, again, our keyword is application. And a DOK level 2 question would be like the Great British Baking Show, if you've seen that, or Hell's Kitchen, one of these shows where they bring people in. These folks already know how to cook. They would not be on these programs if they did not know how to cook. What they do instead is they ask them to apply their skills and apply their talents to the next level as they make things. Baked goods on the Great British Baking Show, or Hell's Kitchen, where they do things like taste it, make it, where they're given some food, they have to taste it, they have no idea what's in it, but then they have to make it. And so you got to be a good cook and a good baker to perform well on these shows. So what we'd be seeing here from a question perhaps on the GED or the high set would be a compare contrast question, a cause and effect question, using information from multiple sources to solve a problem. And the question you can see on the bottom of page 4, or also on your screen, is a good example of a DOK level 2 question. We've got information in the text box. So we've got a chart here, and we've got another information. We've got to decide what's important and how to apply that information. This particular question, we'd have to realize that what's in the chat box doesn't make any difference, or what's in the box under women's voting rights. We don't need to know that information, but we do need to be able to interpret that chart and take information from it and use that, and also do some math. So there's multiple steps here in order to answer that question. So key thing with DOK level 2 is application. So what about DOK level 3? And I'm on page 5 of the handout. DOK level 3 is like the TV show Survivor, which is a survivor itself because it's been on the air for, gosh, 20 years or so. But what we're doing, the key phrase with DOK level 3 is analysis, analyze. On Survivor, they dump folks on a desert island or wherever, and they ask them to be the last one standing, so to speak. So they do physical challenges, but the test is really a mental challenge where they have to form alliances. They have to think critically. They've got to do inferences, and they're asked at the end of the day at the tribal council to justify their thinking. Why did you do this? Why did you form an alliance here? Why did you do that? So it's really, excuse me, I'm recovering from COVID that I had last week, so I'm still not 100% there yet. Despite being vaccinated and boosted, I still got it, but that's a story for another day. But anyway, so we've really got to analyze and think about things as we're competing in Survivor. So on the GED or the high set, we might be creating solutions and explaining reasoning. We might be connecting ideas using supporting evidence from the text or solving multi-step problems. Probably the best example on both GED and high set is the constructed response or the extended response question, where we've got the two paired text, and students have to read and analyze both of those and then decide for the GED which one's better and why, and then a similar question but slightly different with the high set. So this involves some deep thinking, some very cognitively challenging thinking. So how can we help our students to do this? First, what I'm going to ask you to do is please, inside the chat, put something that you have learned or something that you remembered about Webb's depth of knowledge. Maybe some of those keywords we talked about with what is level 1, what is level 2, what is level 3. Please put inside the chat something that you picked up or remembered about Webb's depth of knowledge. If you've been in adult ed for a while, you remember Webb's got a lot of play back in 2014 when the new GED came out, and immediately prior to that. This is kind of like Webb's 2.0, if you will. So just a short phrase here about something you learned from Webb's. And Patrick, thank you for your good health wishes, and for your heart, Whitney, thank you. But please, in the chat, put down something, a brief summary, sentence, phrase, something you picked up from our discussion about Webb's. Let's see, Patrick's mentioning concepts and competencies. And thank you for that. So think about what's level 1? What was the TV show we talked about? What about for level 2? What about for level 3? See, Elaine mentions recalls level 1. Good. Whitney's mentioning that 3 of those levels are on the GED. Very good. Thank you for everyone who's participating inside the chat. So as we move on, we're going to look at 2 keys for GED success, or for success on these depth of knowledge level questions. One being the think aloud that we'll start with, and then secondly will be the asking better questions that we'll cover a little bit later. So let's talk about the think aloud first. I think the think aloud is something that as adult educators, we don't do as much as maybe we could. And what is a think aloud anyways? A think aloud is when we're eavesdropping on someone's thinking. So we can see this gentleman here who's got his glass toward the wall, and he's eavesdropping on some conversation that someone else is thinking. And when we do a think aloud, what we're doing is we are modeling thinking to our students, and we're asking them to watch and see how we think, so they can learn to think about how to handle something like a question on the GED or the high set. Why are think alouds so effective? And think alouds are effective because of mirror neurons. And every time I think of neurons, I think of myself as a parent. I remember when my kids were younger, or I would say something that I remember my father or my mother saying to me. And I was thinking, like, where in the world did that come from? Because I hadn't heard them say that in like 30 years, but suddenly I'm saying that to my kids. And mirror neurons are the reason why, because I saw them and I saw their thought processes. They were parenting me, Lord help them. And I saw what they were doing there, and I was channeling that back to my own kids. And this was 35, 40 years later. So it's amazing how mirror neurons work. But the quote about mirror neurons is this: mirror neurons, these things in our brain, respond to actions that we see done by others. Our brain's neurons will fire as if we are doing that thing ourselves. Whoa, I'm going to say that again. Our brains will respond to actions we see done by others. The neurons in our brains are firing as if we are doing those things ourselves. And that is just mind blowing to think about. But we can see the power of our brain's mirror neurons and what a benefit that can be in our teaching. So one misconception is that think aloud is not direct instruction. With direct instruction, we've got I do, where the instructor is modeling, we do, where the instructor and students are working together, and you do, where students are working on their own to do a task. But we're not doing that with a think aloud. I've demonstrated think alouds to instructors before, and then I'll ask them to do one. And the first thing they do is ask a student a question. And I'm thinking, whoa, no. When we're doing a think aloud, we're modeling our thinking. We're not asking students questions. So essentially with a think aloud, what we're doing is we're modeling our thinking for students. Students are tasked with watching us to get a feel for our thought process. And an instructor can ask themselves questions and answering them, but they're not asking students to do so. It's probably most similar, if we're thinking about direct instruction, to the I do part of that, where we may be doing a think aloud as part of the I do section, but it is slightly different. And of course, I'm going to model this so we can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. So this particular graph that we see here, this particular map, I should say, that we see here, that would be better. Okay, let's see, I need to shift to podium view so I can do this and use my marker. So let me do that. There we go. Let's see if we can bring up a, a pen here. Ah, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to model doing a think aloud. And this is a map that's from the Social Studies for the High Set publication from New Readers Press. So what I'm going to do is model here for a minute how I would do a brief think aloud with students. And what I would ask for you to do, please, is pay attention to how I'm thinking and what I'm doing as I'm doing this. So what I'm going to do is take you through what's going on inside my brain, as scary as that may be. I'm going to take you in and show you what's going on inside my brain. And I'm not going to be asking you questions. I may be asking myself questions, but again, I'm modeling and showing students what's going on inside my brain as I do this. So your mission is to watch and kind of get a feel for my thinking here. So let's go ahead and start. All right, guys, today what we're going to do is something called a think aloud, and I'm going to show you how I think through doing this activity where I'm trying to make sense of this map. So what I want you to do is just follow along and get a feel for how I'm thinking through this. And my hope is that through doing it, when you're faced with similar learning tasks, that you'll be able to do the same thing. Okay, is that fair? All right, so here we go. So I've got this map. And so always what I want to do with when I'm looking at a map is to try to see what it's telling me. Maps, charts, graphs, all tell a story. And it's just my job to figure out what story they're telling. And sometimes they tell more than one story. And sometimes it might take me a while to figure out what story they're telling me. A couple of things that help as I do this is first a title. And that will give me kind of the outline of what's going on here. So I see the particular title of this is U.S. infant mortality rate in 2010. And so let's see, what do I know about infant mortality? Well, I know that having a couple kids of my own and hearing other stories that sometimes sadly babies do die very soon after they're born. Birth is a tough thing, and I'm glad that I didn't have to give birth. I'm just happy I had to stand there and hold my wife's hand while she was giving birth, and my hand still hurts, by the way, from when she was giving birth, even though my youngest is 16 years old. But anyway, so infant mortality is talking about babies who die during the process of birth. And so what I'm going to try to do then is see, looks like this map has a shading with different colors, and these colors are telling me various things. So let's see, I can see darker colors and lighter colors. one thing I want to do is look for a key, or sometimes this is called a legend. And a lot of times this is the lower right-hand corner or lower left-hand corner. And so I see here that I do have this legend that's going to give me some more information. So it, first of all, tells me a rate. Let's see, what do I know about rates? I know rates usually are the amount of something that happens with a total amount. So it's like a fraction. And this is telling me that this is going to be per 1,000. So this might be telling me the number of children that die per 1,000 births. So it looks like the US rate is, we see 6.15 per 1,000 births. And these other things are just going to be giving me some number there per 1,000. Okay, so it seems like the lighter the shade, the greater the number. And I think that's true. As we move down here, it seems that our numbers are getting smaller. We've gone from 8 to 7 to 6 to 5 to less than 5. So that might be 4, 3, 2, or 1. So it would seem, mortality is not a good thing. Dying is not a good thing. So we want to see fewer numbers. So I guess we could look at states that have a darker color are doing a better job with healthcare than states with a lighter color, or at least they're seeing less deaths per 1,000 births. So let's see if I could pick up any clues here. I see a lot of dark over here in the West, out here, California, Idaho, Utah. Alaska looks pretty dark. And again, always when we're dealing with maps, remember, Alaska isn't really here. Alaska is actually way, way, way up north in Canada. And Hawaii is not actually there. It's way, way, way to the west of that, out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So these things, they just show them there for maps, but they're not actually really there. So it looks like West is doing pretty well. The Midwest is doing pretty well. Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin. Looks like some areas of New England, also that darker shade, they've got a lower mortality rate. So where's things lighter? Where's our 8 or greater? We see, looks like in the deep South, Mississippi, Alabama. We see also Mid-South regions as well. Lighter colors there. So I see a couple of stories, and I wonder, this brings up a lot of questions. I wonder what's going on in the West, what's going on in the Midwest, where they're doing a better job, in New England, and what's going on in the Southeast, where we're seeing more children die at birth. What's going on with that? So I don't know what questions I would be answering from that, but at least this helps me to see what's going on. I know it's talking about number of deaths per 1,000. And it's bringing up some questions. I see some trends, and I'm wondering why. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I'm going to ask you once again, please, in the chat, brief phrase, what did I do to make my thinking visible? What did I do here during the Think Aloud to make my thinking visible? So please, inside the chat, I'll give you a second to think. And what did I do to make my thinking visible? So go ahead and please put that inside the chat. Let's see, and it looks like some folks were in the chat while I was doing this. Colder states equals higher mortality rates, possible links. Cheryl, that's an interesting thought. Maybe you may be very much onto something. Let's see, Whitney mentioned about pointing out some things that that I might think are obvious, and of course realizing with teaching things that we think are obvious are not necessarily the case with our students. Who knows? Sometimes we think things are obvious, and yeah, I don't know, but I did point out some things, Whitney, you're exactly right, that I thought were obvious, but whether that was the case, who knows? Patrick mentioned that I did some comparing and contrasting. Let's see, talked about the main ideas, colored numbers. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, I got you, Whitney. I got you. Thank you. And good luck with the toddlers. Let's see, brought forward some questions. Thank you, Patrick. And let's see, Dana mentioned that Alaska and Hawaii do not belong there. Yeah, I learned that through hard experience over years of teaching, where students would say, why is it so cold in Alaska when it's, south of California? What's up with that? But no, it's not. It's just put there to make things easier for ourselves, but it is not indeed actually there. Okay, so any other thoughts? Could go ahead and put those in the chat about what I did to make my thinking visible. And thank you so much for participating with that. So the Think Aloud technique has legs, or in other words, we can use this so often in our teaching, and we can use it in so many ways. One big way that we can use it is with reading, and I'm on page 6 of the handout. One great technique that we can use is to do a think aloud while we are engaged with a reading passage. Many times our students, for whatever reason, don't always get that the main point of reading is making meaning from reading. And you may have worked with students, as I have, where some of the students think reading is all about word calling. And as long as I correctly called out every word and it sounded good, I read. And didn't I do great? But then I asked the student, well, what was that about? And they could tell me nothing about what that was about. We can use a think aloud to help students make the connection that reading is about making meaning of that which we read. And so we can go through a reading passage, take it line by line, sentence by sentence, and show students how we make meaning inside those paragraphs. So on page 6 of the handout toward the middle, I've mentioned some things that we could talk about as we're doing a think aloud. The title makes me think about. Reading this may help me find out about. This isn't making sense. Here's what I can do to understand it better. Reading this made me think about. In doing a prediction, I think blank will happen next. Or as I read, I can picture so-and-so. And this is a valuable technique. Many times we think students are bored as we do this, but I would argue that many times we may be bored when we're doing this, but our students are lapping it up and thinking, wow. And especially if you have readers at the more beginning or intermediate level that have some deficits in alphabetics, fluency, or vocabulary or comprehension, these techniques will really help them to understand better what's going on. But not only with reading, we can do think alouds also with mathematics and show students how we go about problem solving. This new generation of high school equivalency, GED, high set, are all about problem solving. They are not about calculation skills. Yeah, we can teach students how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions, but they are not tested on that. They are tested on real life contextualized word problems that they need to solve. And I would argue, and this is a subject for a whole nother workshop, that we should teach in realistic problem solving ways because that's what our students are tested on. But we could do think alouds in math and show them various techniques we can use for problem solving, like draw a picture, like look for a pattern, like doing guess and check, all those things we can do think alouds and show students how we tackle these various problems. We can also do think alouds with writing, where we could actually create paragraphs and create papers. We could do the GED extended response, where we walk students through how we made meaning of the passages, how we then wrote them, and they can see line by line. Sometimes students think, we beam down from the teacher planet and everything we write is beautiful and perfect on the get-go. And they need to know that that's not true, that we struggle and that we strayed, and that a lot of times the genius of writing is rewriting. And I'll say that again, a lot of times the genius of writing is rewriting. That first time that we put down isn't going to fly, and that we need to recraft it, and that we need to do it again. So we could actually sit down and write and show students how we do the writing process, and get in there and make mistakes. And I don't need to try to do that. You may need to try to do that, but when I teach, I'm making mistakes, but I think it's healthy for our students to see that so they can learn and realize that we're not perfect and that we make mistakes too, and we don't always know how to solve the problems. So the think aloud really has a lot of good things that it can be used for. And so yeah, check it out and do it there. Let's see, we got a couple good things here. Christina talked about how I reviewed and provided information on the title and numbers, what they meant when I was doing the Think Aloud. Thank you. Whitney's given a plug for the score boost. All right. Thank you, Whitney. Yay. Yay, Whitney. Okay. So one other thing that I wanted to do before turning it over to Greg was talking about asking better questions. So when we dealing with these higher level Webb's, Dok level 2, level 3, it helps if we can do a better job of asking questions. And that's pretty easy to do. On page 7, you'll see a wonderful tool that's been out for a number of years about question stems. And so we don't always know, what is a Dok level 1 question? What's a Dok level 2? What's a Dok level 3? We don't always know that. These question stems help to do this. And we can see again, Dok level 1, mostly on the recall situation, the Dok level 2, where we're doing application type questions, the Dok level 3, where we're doing the analysis questions, and then those Dok level 4, which are extended thinking over a long period of time. So we could, these are handy dandy questions that we could use as we're building. These are questions we could give to students to get them in practice of seeing, knowing, and understanding how to ask questions in this fashion. So question stems can help here. One thing, and I'm on page 8 of the handout, one thing that I think we don't do, lesson planning, sometimes we're spending all this time doing these wonderful things, but we never sometimes will plan questions in advance. Think about that. Think about the last time that you did some lesson planning. Did you think about what questions you were going to ask in advance? I think that's one thing that gets kind of neglected. And so I think it's equally as important when we are planning a lesson to think about the questions we're going to ask in advance and to think about, okay, what am I trying to do here? How's this question going to help us get there? I think we're just so used to firing out questions that we don't always think about what our goal is in asking and answering questions. So I would encourage all of us as we're planning lessons to think about what questions we will ask in advance, and that's going to allow for better questions to be asked for sure. And certainly we want to do some scaffolding here. You'll see here this analogy or illustration with a ladder where we've got the higher up we go on this ladder, the more deeply we're asking students to think. So build a base. Let's start out with these Dok level 1 questions where students can learn more about a subject. So many times our students might have some knowledge gaps. So these Dok level 1 questions, if we're studying about whatever, we can ask questions to fill in the gaps there, build that base of knowledge, and then go on to the level 2 questions where we're going to be asking these analysis type questions in level 2. And then we're going to move from there to asking those more cognitively challenging questions in Dok level 3. So the other questions at the Dok level 1 are going to be more the who, what, when, where, why, how. And then as we move up the ladder, we're going to be asking more open-ended questions as time goes on. And students are well positioned to answer these questions. And I would say I've heard so many student stories over the years, and I'm amazed, frankly, at our student survival skills and how well they've done with having deficits in reading, math, writing. It's amazing. Our students can handle Dok level 2 and level 3 questions, because for many of them to survive, they've had to ask and answer these questions all the time. How am I going to make $20 last the 5 days more until the end of the month? That's a Dok level 2, level 3 question. So our students can handle this type of thinking because many times they've had to deal with it over and over in their life experiences. Another good thing about asking and answering questions are so many times we have a student that wants to answer all the questions and then one or more student that wants to answer none of the questions. So it's really important to try to get answers from all our students. And of course, we always want to give our students the opportunity to opt out. That's important. Give them that respect. But we want to do everything we can to encourage students to participate as much as possible. So I've done things before, like when I've had classes with a seating chart to put a mark when I've seen when a student's asked a question, or I have when I've asked a question to say, yeah, if you answered a question a minute ago, just relax and let someone else answer it. There's ways to make this happen, but we want to try to get as many students involved as at all possible. And of course, give a lot of kudos to that more quiet student who finally answers a question after they've been sitting in our class for weeks and haven't done much, or they've been on our Zoom class and have never turned their camera on and those types of things. So definitely give kudos to that student. I love that phrase, the oldest saying, none of us is as smart as all of us. And I think that's true. When we can get input from the whole group, we're building classroom community just as much as we are also learning things that we need to know. So tap into that. None of us is as smart as all of us. We can also use collaborative learning for more difficult questions. Using the think, pair, share is a tried and true classic technique. So give students a chance to think. When we ask a question, don't expect, I had read somewhere that the average instructor waits 0.7 seconds. In other words, less than 1 second from the time a question's asked to an answer. Students need more time to think. I need more time to think than 0.7 of a second. Give students time. So when we do something like a think, pair, share, give students 30 seconds to a minute. Have them pair off with someone, whether you're teaching virtually or face-to-face, and then ask them to share, maybe in writing, maybe with the whole class, maybe with another group. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And so, none of us is as smart as all of us. So let's use that collaborative learning for more difficult questions. We'll get a whole lot better answers. Ask students to generate questions. Too often in the classroom, we are the only ones who are asking questions. And many times students have great questions. Share with them the DOK question stem sheet, and that could give them some models of some questions to ask. So if we go at the end of a lesson to say, okay, I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm expecting each person to ask a question and then see if maybe some of the other students can answer it instead of us as the instructor. Our goal is to shape learners to be lifelong learners who are self-motivated and self-directed. So learning to ask good questions is a valuable skill, again, not only for our classrooms, but for the workplace as well. And then the way we answer questions is so important as well. A lot of times we say, you're right, or no. Both of those answers have one thing in common, and that is students' brains turn off. The student who got the answer right said, oh, great, I did it. Yay, give me my reward. And they stop thinking. And we don't want that. We want students to continue to think. So we can answer a question in ways that keep students thinking. Suggested a couple in the middle of page 8. So it mentions resist saying that's right, since other students will stop thinking, believing the right answer has been given. Instead, give students answers positive reinforcement. Thank you. Ask other students for ideas, and then create some follow-up questions. So you could say, thank you for that. I'd like to hear someone else's response. Oh, yeah, great. Thank you for that. I'd like to hear someone else's. That keeps the conversation going. That keeps students thinking. And that's vital as we deal with these higher level DOK level 2 and level 3 questions. And also, last but not least, increasing wait time is important. Wait time, the definition is how long an instructor pauses after asking a question. I mentioned earlier that the average instructor waits less than a second after asking a question to get an answer. And that is not enough time for our students to think. It's not enough time for me to think. Many times our students have need some time. Some research I've read talks about the hiker brain and race car brains. And a lot of times race car brains, get the answers. 6 times 7 is 42, bing. But many of our students have that hiker brain where they need time to think and they need time to mull something over. And that's very, very important. So give students more time, and especially when we're asking DOK level 2 and level 3 questions. The Grapple is a great strategy for doing this. It's on the bottom of page 8 in your handout. Grapple is an acronym to help build in wait time. Group students using DOK, there's a chart on the next page that shows a little bit of how to do that. The R stands for remind students of the questioning rules. I'm going to ask you a question, but don't shut out the answer. Also, I won't be calling on raised hands. Ask the question, and sometimes we need to do this multiple times because students don't always hear us the first time. Pause to create wait time. Pick a student strategically. The L stands for listen, and then the E stands for effectively react to answers. I think Grapple is a neat strategy that prevents us from like, here's the question and I want to answer immediately. But you can find that on the bottom of page 8. Questioning is tough. I've taught for over 30 years and I struggle every time I teach with wait time. It is so hard. Silence is hard many times and we want to have folks talking. So, but again, genius happens in the silence. So Grapple may be a strategy to use. And then finally, wait time in DOK. If we're asking DOK level 1 questions, let's give students about 10 seconds. DOK level 2, maybe we could do a pair share situation, give students a minute. DOK level 3, maybe we could put those students in informal groups, give them about 10 minutes. And then DOK 4, if you're doing some problem-based or project-based learning, they need a lot more than 10 minutes in order to be able to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and allow Greg to dive in here in just a second. And what I'm going to do here also is check out, see what else we might have inside the chat while Greg's getting set up. Let's see, Christina mentioned she loves the question stems. Great. Glad to see that. Got several other good comments as well. Wonderful. Let's see here. Patrick's mentioning about wait time and the importance. Let's see. Dan mentions about some good points about Webb's and level 1, level 2, level 3. Good. Well, thank you. And if while Greg is presenting, again, if we still have some other thoughts or questions, please go ahead and put those inside of the chat and I'll be happy to tackle those while Greg is talking a little bit about how we can apply this information with some New Readers Press resources.
Well, thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm going to spend our last 5 minutes or so just giving you a quick look at some New Readers Press resources that teach or support the Think Aloud strategy that Steve shared with us today. Steve, always great information and love your examples. I will say it's always a pleasure working with you. I always walk away with new information whenever we meet, whenever we collaborate like this. So happy that you're on the call today. Now, before I begin, I would like to make 2 points. First is this: just because a student reads or scores at a lower level doesn't mean that she or he thinks at a lower level, right? And second, high school equivalency test prep doesn't always happen at the 9th or 10th grade reading level. So for example, our 4-level Breakthrough to Math series, it's written at reading level 3 to 5, but it takes students from basic skills with whole numbers to fractions, decimals, and percents, to algebra, to geometry. Designed specifically to help students overcome learning obstacles and develop math confidence, skills are broken down into very basic steps by focusing on one skill at a time. Each book delivers short, manageable chunks of information on each page with plenty of white space, which I love, to make the instruction less intimidating and more accessible. The first 5 pages of the teacher's guide touch on topics like math phobia and anxiety, real things for me in my studies. I was just terrified of math and had knots in my stomach at the mere mention of the subject. Difference in student needs and learning styles is also covered, and tips for effective instruction. The next 4 pages in the guide recommend 2 instructional strategies to be used consistently, providing clear explanations and step-by-step instructions. They are, one of them, the think aloud technique that we talked about so much today, and second, the problem-solving process. Check these Breakthrough to Math books out. It's one of my favorite math series. Here's just a quick example from Level 4, Book 3, Circles and Volume. As you can see, the problem is laid out so that the student can easily apply the think aloud strategy. Even modeling thinking aloud by asking questions in the first person. What do I need to get the answer? Add, subtract, multiply, divide, provide a definition, draw a diagram, use a formula. So just to get them in the habit of thinking aloud. Next, I'd like to call out, and not for the first time, we learned that Whitney loves these books. I'd like to call out our Score Boost series for the Table 11-12. There's Score Boost for the CASAS, Score Boost for the GED, and Score Boost for the HiSET. Now, although these 4 series span 57 workbooks over 4 levels, they have in common the same lesson structure and methodology. And a key feature found in every lesson of every workbook of every level of every Score Boost series is the think prompt. Think prompts and/or their answers are often written in first person, and they model critical thinking. Encouraging students to read these thoughts aloud forms good habits and builds critical thinking muscles. So here it is in the guided practice of CASAS Math Level C, and I'll blow it up so we can see it better. Right? Perimeter is the distance around a shape. I need to find the length and the width of the rectangle using the distance between the points. So again, just the text actually enforcing the skill by, as the student reads it, she or he feels as though she or he is thinking aloud. And here's a second one. I can find area by multiplying the length and width of a rectangle. So just to get them going. And here in the Table Level M, language book, it reads, what words in the first sentence connect to a phrase in the second sentence? What other connections can I find? Right, so just gets into the habit of asking good questions and thinking aloud. Here's an example from the Score Boost for the GED, Math Algebraic Reasoning Workbook. I can use exponent rules to simplify the powers. I am looking for the number that when multiplied by itself 4 times equals 16. Right? And a great example from the HiSET Essay Writing Book. There it is. All the options begin omit, so I'll check each sentence against the topic sentence to see if it contributes to the main idea. The one that doesn't should be removed. Then I'll check my answer by rereading the paragraph without that sentence. And here's a second example. I need to read paragraph 2 and evaluate all the choices to see which one improves the flow and unity of the paragraph. And even the TestWise feature at the bottom here directs the student to ask her or himself a question, right? To decide whether a sentence should be removed. Ask yourself, does this sentence help support the paragraph's main idea, or does it distract the reader? The Think It Through feature in the social studies and science for the GED books can also be used to practice the think aloud technique. Here's an example. Think it through. What's the cartoon about? What's the question asking? Which choice is correct, right? Again, stressing consistent methodology and reinforcement. This skill is practiced in every single lesson. Here's another example from the Science for the GED test book. Which of the clothes would limit head movement? What's the question asking? What happens during a rear end collision to cause whiplash? So on. You know, yes, we are out of time, of course. I talked as fast as I could. You'll find sample pages, correlations to national standards, and more on our website. It's newreaderspress.com. Hey, better yet, reach out to Elaine Pardiak, your friendly neighborhood state representative. Elaine, closing comments?
Yes, thanks so much, Greg and Stephen. This was wonderful. I think it was very helpful. And Whitney and Patrick, thank you for having us today. We greatly appreciate it. Just as we close out, I just wanted to remind everyone that for joining today's session, you can receive free shipping on any orders over $100. The promo code is McKay22, and it's good through the end of March. So it's just a reminder. And then a couple other things. I put the email addresses here. So if you're wanting to kind of take advantage of your pro literacy memberships, just some little reminders of where to go for additional information. And always my information is here. So hope everybody enjoys their Friday. And Patrick and Whitney, thanks for having us. And Greg and Steve, thank you so much for taking the time today. It was wonderful. Good to see you.
Thank you all so much. We so appreciate you. Take care.
All right.
Thanks. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.